Hi, everybody. I am so excited for this YA Fantasy Retelling panel. We have such an amazing lineup of authors, also a variety of different stories and inspirations. So I'm really excited to dive in and chat all about retellings and fantasy. If you don't know who I am, my name is Lily. I'm the moderator for the panel and the face, I guess, behind Utopia State of Mind. And now the authors will introduce themselves, and then we'll go into the questions that I have. So, Robin, do you want to start with the introductions?
Sure. Hi, my name is Robin Ha. I'm a cartoonist based in Virginia. I was born in Seoul, South Korea, and I moved here when I was 14. My newest book is The Fox Maidens, which we're going to be talking about today. It's a graphic novel. It's my first fictional graphic novel based on the Korean mythology of Kumiho, which is a nine-tailed fox.
Hi, I'm Tracy Chi. I'm a YA fantasy author at heart, and then I have one little historical called We Are Not Free. My latest title is, I think it's behind me somewhere. There it is. Kindling is my latest title. It is a YA fantasy retelling of Seven Samurai / Magnificent Seven, set in this kind of broken, war-torn world where the war is technically over, and all of the soldiers have kind of been released to do as they will, and they're kind of lacking purpose without a war to fight. And oh boy, they get roped into helping a girl save her town from some bandits, and many bad things happen after that. RM, I think you're next.
I'm RM Romero, and I am most recently the author of Death's Country, which is a polyamorous Orpheus and Eurydice retelling that takes place in Miami, where I live, although I'm currently in Colorado visiting family.
Hi, I'm Tara Sim. I am the young adult and adult fantasy author of too many books to count. The most recent one is We Shall Be Monsters, which is basically Frankenstein meets Indian mythology about a girl trying desperately to raise her sister from the dead, only to be roped into a rebellion where they're like, hey, can you resurrect this dead prince for us? And she's like, I guess. And then she ends up resurrecting the wrong boy, and many shenanigans and angst ensues.
Hi, I'm Markel Graybo. I'm the YA author of Call Forth a Fox. It's actually my debut novel, and it is a sapphic twist on the classic fairy tale Snow White and Rose Red, about a girl who saves a fox from a bear, only for that bear to turn into a boy with no memory of who he is. All he knows is that he must kill the fox, and so the girl and her sister set out to break his curse and keep the fox and their forest safe.
By the way, everyone who's watching, if you have any questions during the panel, then please drop them in the chat, and I will remember to go back to them at the end. I also love how in We Shall Be Monsters, kind of like what you said, right? Like you resurrect someone and immediately they're like, can you do it again? Like, right? Like you were successful the first time. Why don't you try it again?
Do it again, but better.
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
no pressure.
The first question that I have for everyone is kind of just going back to the theme of our panel, which is, could you all tell us about the inspirations and thoughts behind this book in relation to the retelling aspect? And when did you first become acquainted with the source material? Because I really love knowing kind of when you first thought of that. Tara, do you want to start?
Oh. Tara, come back. Tara, we miss you.
I know. I'm
like, there you are. Yeah,
there we go.
Sorry.
Okay. I was just asking about the inspirations and thoughts behind this book in relation to the retelling aspect and the first experience you had with the source material. And I picked on Tara to start.
That was unfortunate timing. Yeah, so when it comes to We Shall Be Monsters, my first kind of experience with the source material. Like obviously I had known what Frankenstein was for a long time. It's in all sorts of media. It's in like the literary conscious. But I didn't like actually fully read the book until college. And I had like known before then, like basically what it was about, but like reading the book was an entirely different experience because I was like, oh, this is actually like not exactly what I thought it was. It's not what like these media portrayals of the monster are actually like trying to tell us. So that has always kind of like sat with me for a while. I love, you know, tropes of like monstrous things not actually being monstrous. It's only society's perception of them becoming monstrous that therefore then makes them monstrous, and like that whole thing. Like I've always been obsessed with it. Excuse me, sorry, I'm recovering from being sick, so I'm a little but that's always kind of carried with me. So in writing this book, I really wanted that to kind of be the focus, like the themes of Frankenstein first and foremost. So I would actually call We Shall Be Monsters more of a reimagining than a retelling, because I feel like a retelling, like for example, one of my other books, Scavenge the Stars, it's a retelling of Count of Monte Cristo. That's a bit more like beat for beat of the original story. Like even though it's an entirely new story, it still takes a lot of like the same kind of like core concepts of like certain scenes, certain relationships and dynamics and stuff, versus We Shall Be Monsters. It's a completely new original story, but it's still taking the themes and kind of like the aesthetic of Frankenstein and kind of distilling it down into something that makes it a bit more unique.
I first encountered the source material for Kindling also in college. I was 19 years old, and it was between like my first and second years of undergrad. And I was back home working for like this little local movie theater. And my coworkers were like these huge movie buffs. They all loved movies. And I was like, you know, I saw the blockbusters. That's about where I was in my film knowledge. And so like every not break, but break in between, like, you know, people showing up, they just talk about movies the whole time. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? What is that? I love learning, and I'm kind of eternally curious. It's like, whoa, okay, whoa, film can do that, whoa. And so eventually my boss and coworkers, they made me like this masterclass list of like, this is the American film canon. And on that list was Seven Samurai and The Magnificent Seven. And luckily at the time, this was before streaming, when we had like this little $1 movie rental store. Like, so you could pay $1, rent a movie for a night, as long as it wasn't like one of the new DVD releases, and then just kind of return it the next day. And I got through so many movies that way, including Seven Samurai and Magnificent Seven. And like out of all the movies I watched that summer, it was these two that really just stuck with me, because I feel like the substance of them is so ingrained now in our own cultural and American cultural consciousness. Like this idea of like this kind of lone warrior with a heart of gold, and they're like roaming around doing good deeds, right? That's so much a part of like what we think a hero is. And I found it enchanting, both of them. And they're both, I think, quite different, even though the plot beats are the same. And so that stuck with me for 20 or so years, like a really long time. And I knew that I knew that this was kind of in my creative bloodstream, if that makes sense. And so in the Reader trilogy, there are these cowboy pirates that are, you know, in part, like their vibe is very inspired by the Magnificent Seven. And then it was, I think, during COVID that I was rewatching the most recent adaptation of Magnificent Seven, the one with Denzel Washington. And I was like, you know what? I bet I could do this too. I bet I could do this, and I bet I could do it for teenagers. And that kind of set me off on this journey of writing Kindling.
So my inspiration came from many, many different sources. While I was growing up in Korea, I read a lot of comic books in Korea, and also like from Japan. And also I watched a lot of movies and TV shows. So I'm just gonna share a screen for a second to show you like visually what I'm talking about, because I'm a very visual person, I'm a cartoonist. So, visually there are a lot of things that I really like enjoyed as a kid. So here is some examples of nine-tailed fox. I mean, nine-tailed fox exists in Korea, but also in China, Japan. I mean, they're called different things in Vietnam. So it's like the kind of pan-Asian, very popular character. And I encountered her probably like the first time that I probably grew up hearing about Kumio from multiple sources, but like the one that I remember really clearly is from this TV show in Korea called the 전설의 고향, which means the hometown of folklore. And this show has been running for probably like 30, 40 years. I think they actually recently rebooted it. But basically, every week they retell a Korean like traditional ghost stories, and they had an episode about Kumiho, and she just like struck me as like such a different, unique character. She was not only like beautiful and powerful, but she was very mysterious, and like she just stood out from all these other like female characters I was familiar with in Korean folktale, which are basically like sacrificing themselves for their husband and their son, and they're very subservient, they're like very, you know like they're kind of, not really inspiring character for me as a young girl. And this character Kumio was like so cool, so she always kind of stayed in my head as like, oh, I want to like dive more into her character. And also in the 90s, when I was growing up there were a lot of imported film from China and Hong Kong. And the genre is called wuxia, which is basically like martial art, um, like fantasy films. And they had a lot of really fantastical elements, like they're ghosts and they're like magicians who fight with like Taoist, like talisman, and like there's like vampire characters, and like also like star-crossed like love, there's romance, and and action. Everybody's flying all the time, So like visually, also like story wise, I really really enjoyed this wuxia film genre. So all of this kind of like influenced me, and also like I read a lot of Korean comics, and Korean comics, you know, it really had like a renaissance period when I was a kid there, like in the 80s and 90s. And there are a lot of Korean comics based in like some mythology or legends, and they're all set in like the medieval times. So they're all wearing like beautiful costumes, and there's like sword play and also romance. And all of these things really like stuck with me till this day. So when I had an opportunity to do a fictional YA graphic novel, it was kind of like no brainer for me to go back to my love for Gumiho.
Yeah, so I actually came to know Snow White and Rose Red like the very week I decided to write the story.
Wow.
So yeah, I was in grad school for writing for children and young adults at Hamlin, and I was figuring out a second semester project to do, and I wanted to finally try writing a fairy tale retelling. I'd always loved reading them, but I'd never really had, I guess, like the confidence to try writing one myself. And so the program kind of like gave me that boost that I needed to finally do it. But I didn't want to start with a fairy tale that I knew really well, or that I had grown up with, or that had been like Disney-fied, because I wanted the chance to really bring like my own fresh perspective to it. And so I was at the winter residency, kind of just like, I didn't have my book of fairy tales with me. So I decided I was just like going to do a lot of Googling, like what are some like lesser known Grimm fairy tales? And when I came across Snow White and Rose Red first, I didn't even know there was a different Snow White character in the Brothers Grimm canon. Like they're completely different stories. And so that was intriguing to me. And then the second thing that was most intriguing was all of the queer subtext that I found in the story, particularly with the character of Rose Red and how she's positioned as kind of an other compared to her more traditionally feminine sister. And so that was kind of the stroke of the spark of inspiration to do a queer retelling of that story, especially since the ending of the original fairy tale is very, very heteronormative, where both sisters are married by the end, and one, Rose Red, to someone we don't even meet on the page, like the prince's brother. So I'm like, wow, that completely goes against my queer reading of the story. And so it was fun to approach a retelling with that in mind. And for that reason, I would also say that Call Forth a Fox is more reimagining than a retelling, because I definitely stray from the beats of the source material.
I was first introduced to the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice when I was a kid. I had an illustrated book of world mythology that I was completely obsessed with when I was in 3rd or 4th grade. I definitely would have been into like the Rick Riordan Presents series and the Percy Jackson books if I had been a kid growing up back then. And I was always drawn to the stories of the underworld the most because they were so bizarre. I mean, there's a lot of very bizarre myths out there anyway. Like anything from Norse mythology is going to be weird. But I was particularly enamored with these ideas of, you know, the various levels of the underworld and where do you go and who's there and who can actually make the journey there. Because most of the time it's a hero or a god or a demigod who goes down there to make a request of usually the monarch of hell in some way. But Orpheus was very different. Orpheus was just a guy who happened to have the worst luck ever, and that his wife died on their wedding day, and he was determined to bring her back. You know, he was taught how to play his lyre by a god, but he had no magical powers otherwise. So that really interested me. And then as I grew older, I found all these other fascinating retellings and reimaginings of the story, whether that was the film Black Orpheus, which takes place in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil and focuses on Carnival, or What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams, which is a visually stunning movie about a man who descends into the underworld to find his wife. And I decided to do a queer twist on it just because I hadn't seen that done before. I was like, well, you know, queer people also have intense bonds, whether they're romantic or platonic. In this case, it is a romantic triad.
The next question I have, I want to ask a little bit about something that you all have kind of touched on a little bit, which is what were elements that you knew you wanted to change, and what did you consciously choose to retain? Robin, you want to start? Because I loved the visual images that you had for us.
Sure. And I think I forgot to answer your question about is it a retelling or reimagining? And I think my story is also a reimagining rather than retelling, because I did change a lot of stuff. It's nothing like the ones that I grew up watching. Sorry, what was the question again?
It was things that you wanted to change, and then things that you chose to retain, or things that you chose to keep.
Sure. So the most prominent version of Kumiho that I grew up watching is that she is a very powerful, like 1,000-year-old fox demon, but she fell in love with a man, and now she wants to like become a human just so like she can, be in love with this guy. And that just did not sit well with me. I'm like, why would you do that? And why does she have to give up her power? Why does she have to be all human? So like, I basically, all I kept is that, and also Kumio in most of the retelling is that she's kind of a villain, like a femme fatale figure, where she like uses her beautiful, appearance to like lure men, and then like, she eats their liver or their suck out their soul. So all I kept is that there is a Kumio character in my book that is more kind of like the traditional villain character. So she is very powerful, but she uses that basically to fulfill her revenge, and she's kind of like a serial killer, and she has no remorse. So she's definitely like a villain, but with understandable reason for being the way she is. So I kept that, and I kept some of like the magical element where like they use this thing called fox marble. We call it yogusul, which is kind of like the device they use to like suck people's soul like out of their body. So I use that. So there, like I used like a little bit here and there, but basically like everything else that happens in my book are completely new. Like it's completely my own uh version of it. And also like, you know, some of you guys have touched on like there's so many like gender tropes in Korean folktale. Like women are almost always subservient, almost always sacrificing like even their lives for their you know father, their husband, you know. So and also they're mostly doing like house chores all the time. Like I have not seen one male figure in Korean folktale that does like laundry and cook for their family. Like doesn't exist. So I was thinking, you know, but I don't want to like make like such a black and white, you know, divide in these chores either, because like men or women should be doing all kinds of things to, you know, make their partners or their loved ones happy and fulfilled. So it's like I would love for my partner. I'm a cisgendered woman in a cisgendered relationship, but I love it when my partner does my laundry. I love when he cooks for me. You know, I love it when he, you know, cleans the house. So you know, I kind of wanted to play with that. So you know, like you can do all of these things whether or not you're, you know, a female person or a male person. You can still do these things to, you know, show that you're appreciating the other person. But also like I wanted to explore a queer relationship because that does not exist in Korean folktale at all. So yeah, so I think like I'll say like 90% of my book is complete reimagining.
Yeah, kind of going off of what Robin said with, you know, the kind of heteronormative gender stereotype kind of thing. I really wanted to play with that a lot in We Shall Be Monsters. Because you know, kind of like I said before, I wanted to keep a lot of the themes of Frankenstein, which is like knowledge is dangerous. Who can have knowledge? What is your perception of that person who has that knowledge? And do you consider them a danger because they have that knowledge? Society's perceptions of things that are other and therefore evil, what is good and what is evil, that kind of thing. But I, instead of, you know, having a dude character, I want it to be a teenage girl suffering through these things. You know, having not just the role of Victor Frankenstein, but also the role of the monster. Because I feel like a lot of times teenage girls are vilified. And so I kind of wanted to play with that in a more like speculative element. And, you know, in India, there is rampant misogyny. There's a lot of superstition. There are still witch hunts that are conducted today, especially in like the more rural areas of India. And so I kind of wanted to play with this element of like, what do, you know, these people seeing this teenage girl doing these weird like little experiments, like how are they going to react to that? How is her life in danger because of that? And so I really liked delving into my main character Kajal's psychology in terms of coming from it as both the scientist and the monster in one. But I also really wanted to keep a lot of the kind of like main core aesthetic of Frankenstein. So like there is horror, there is some gothic elements to it, but it is like 100% Indian at the same time. So kind of mixing it up and trying to have this like gothic essence kind of distilled out through this other culture was really fascinating to me. And also especially doing research on Indian mythology and realizing how well the themes actually kind of married together, because there's some messed up stuff in mythology, as we all know. So yeah, I feel like that just kind of clicked.
Yeah, so probably the biggest change that I made to the fairy tale of Snow White and Rose Red is that I made the queer subtext that I found text. And so not only is there a central sapphic romance with my main character, Ro, who is the Rose Red character, but she's also bi. And so that kind of influences the way that she approaches the conflict of the fairy tale, which is that here is this cursed boy. He's cursed to become a bear. And in the fairy tale, there's a very one sided, like the two sisters are very much in the camp of the bear. Like he gets to stay in their cottage for the winter. In the end, they help him break his curse and get his treasure and his kingdom back. And so, what I found interesting with having a bi main character is how things are less like following a binary, black and white, like you must choose this or that. And so, the central conflict of Call for the Fox is that Ro is told that the only way to break the curse is for someone to die, either the bear or the fox. And she resists that. She believes she doesn't believe in that kind of violence, and she doesn't believe in having to make that kind of choice. And so she's resisting that and trying to find a way to break the boy's curse while also keeping everyone safe and not having to make that drastic choice of having one live and one die. And so those were the biggest changes I brought to the story. And then I think the things I kept were kind of, because with the reimagining, I like to keep the spirit of the source material for sure. And so the bond between the sisters is really what drives the original fairy tale. No matter their differences, they're united in their love of the forest, their family, and then in their pursuit of helping and sheltering the bear. And so I wanted to keep that spirit throughout the novel and really emphasize their bond. And so that was the biggest thing I wanted to keep.
RM, I want to hear your answer. Yeah, okay. Because I think mine is the most faithful out of all of these. Like it sounds like mine is like the most faithful retelling. And so I want to hear RM's answer and then I'll go.
Okay. So like a lot of people on this panel, I decided to do a reimagining rather than a retelling. You know, the original version of Orpheus and Eurydice is a tragedy. There's this feeling of inevitability to it. Like, well, he tried, but there was no way he was ever going to, whether you interpret his turning around to look at Eurydice as arrogance or as true love, as insecurity. So I wanted to write a story that was more about the part of the myth that interested me, which was that this figure who is not your traditional hero descends into the underworld, which is essentially the most dangerous place in any form of mythology, to rescue this person that he loves. And of course, in this version, the main character Andres goes with one of his girlfriends, Renee, to find their other girlfriend, Leora, in the underworld. And I also didn't want it to be any one particular underworld. It is a mashup of Greek mythology and Norse mythology and Aztec, my own ideas. I also brought in a lot of Dante, because Dante is very strange and very interesting to me, despite being Jewish. Just this idea of you descend into the underworld and you get to meet your heroes, but you also get to meet all these people who were terrible in life, and how do you react to that? And I also, like many people on this panel, was talking about gender roles, specifically toxic masculinity in Latin culture, and how the main character is trying to push back against that and orient himself in a way that is still masculine, but much more positive and much more loving and protective of himself and his girlfriends in a way that is not violent.
Yeah, so with Kindling, I think on the copy we call it a reimagining, but like listening to this panel here, I feel like it might be the just most like one-to-one retelling out of all of us, which is interesting, because what I decided to keep was the shape of the plot. Like it starts with, you know, a farmer coming over to these warriors and asking for help, and like part one is like the gathering of the heroes, where we're kind of getting the gang together, we're getting the team together. Part two is them at this village trying to kind of fortify the defenses, and then part three is just one big battle. And so I kept that. I kept the number. It's seven samurai, magnificent seven. It's seven in kindling. And I also realized that I think I did this in part because I feel like I'm part of this kind of tradition of retelling, right? Because there's seven samurai, came out in 1954, I believe. And then there's the American remake, Magnificent Seven, right? And so it took the same thing, right? It took the same plot beats. It had the same seven characters, the same number of them die. And then in 2016 was like the newest Magnificent Seven. And that one, same beats, right? Same number of characters. And so I felt like maybe, I didn't think about this at the time, but I feel like it's part of kind of this tradition of retelling this story, kind of the same arc of it, the same characters. What I decided to change was I wanted to make it YA. And this was kind of the crux of the matter for me. If they're young people, if these seven kind of warriors are teenagers, then and the war is over, right? That means that they had to be child soldiers. And I was really thinking about like, what kind of world would do that to their children? Like, why would they ask children to fight in these wars like this? And that's where kind of this magic system came out, this kindling magic system, where using the magic shortens your lifespan. And so kind of the more lifespan you have ahead of you, the more you can kind of be an effective magical soldier. But if you're kind of older, right? If you're an adult and you start using this magic, you have a very limited time where you can be effective. And so that's why they're children. Like they are literally, it's called burnout in the book. They're burning themselves out for the cause using this magic. And so that kind of changed the shape of the world. And these warriors being children also ended up kind of, I think, changing a little, in a little way, the themes of it, like why the effect that violence has, not just on kind of the countryside and the populace, but also these really young people, right? And the effects that it has on their psyches and what they're asked to give up for the greater good, became a little bit different if you're talking about kids rather than middle-aged men, as in all of these others. And so that's something I changed. I also made them all women or non-binary. I just, we don't need another story about seven men. Let's change it up a bit. That one was more just me being a little rebellious. Didn't have as good of a reason, except that I wanted to.
I just want to remind everyone watching, if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat during the panel. I want to ask now about some common themes between books, and I want to start with the siblings in Call Forth a Fox and We Shall Be Monsters. You both have already talked about how important these relationships are. So I wanted to know from both of you, how do you establish the dynamic between the siblings and differentiating them, obviously, from each other? And what do you think is the most challenging obstacle or conflict point between them? Markel, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. So I think from the start, it was easy to differentiate them because I had the fairy tale to look back on. And as much as their relationship is strong in the fairy tale, they're very different, not only physically in appearance wise, but also in behavior. So you've got the Snow White character who is like blonde and kind of like very feminine, keeps more to the home, helping out their mother. And then you've got Rose Red, who's got the more like the red hair, kind of like wild hairstyle, like not like prim and proper, would prefer to be like running in the fields and the forest than being at home. And so those were kind of the more like stereotypes that I started with. But then you have to, in a novel, you have to go deeper than that. You can't just have superficial characters like that. And so I think the biggest difference between the two characters, and also what serves as kind of the conflict between them, is kind of their different outlooks on life and their futures. The Snow White character, Erwin, she is the elder sister. She is straight. And so her dreams about the future are kind of easier for her to have, like imagining falling in love with her prince, or, you know, kind of like open to new experiences, that kind of stuff. But with Ro being bi, and as somebody who's faced biphobia from her village, even though she could end up with a prince, it's harder for her to imagine that kind of future for herself because of how she's had to kind of isolate herself and protect herself from those around her who don't understand or accept her. And so she has a little more like careful or cynical view of the world, where she's like, I'm fine just staying right where I am. Like, I'll stay in my forest, I'll stay in my cottage. Like, nothing needs to change. And the fun thing about starting each character from that premise, is how both of their views of the world change as the story goes on. And how with Ro, it's more opening herself up to new experiences and realizing that maybe the comfort of your home, one, maybe isn't as comfortable as you thought it was. And then two, maybe it's like good to branch out and open yourself up to new experiences, especially when you find people who will kind of help carry you through those new experiences. And then for Erwin, it's more kind of, she has to become more of a realist, and less of a dreamer, and realize that the things that she dreamed about for herself maybe aren't really what she wanted. Maybe those were dreams put in her head by her parents and those around her. And so they're always in different places, but then they have the shared experience of change and growth and growing up.
Yeah, kind of similar to what Markel was saying, and We Shall Be Monsters. So I have two sets of siblings. I have a pair of sisters and a pair of brothers, and both sets have the same experience of one of them being dead and the other one being alive, and the alive one being, well, the better one died, so fuck this, I guess. Excuse my language. But so with Kajal and Lassia, the sisters, you know, I was saying before that there's this theme of like monstrousness and like how society views you know, teenage girls and what actually constitutes as a monster. So in Kajal's case, my main character, she is very grumpy. She's very like keeps to herself. She doesn't like people. She doesn't like anything except her sister, really, and doing like little science experiments. So she considers herself like the bad sister, right? And Lassia was like a lot more outgoing. She was cheerful. She knew like how to cook and stuff like that. And she was just a very comforting presence. And so Kajal like considers herself more the monster, and Lassia, the one who died, was the better one. And you know, she can't really live without her sister, or like, you know, what's the point of all this? So she's like really dead set, forgive the pun, on resurrecting her sister. Only for us to, as the book goes on, discover that like Lassia wasn't as innocent as the reader initially thinks. Like there's a flashback that we get at some point in the book where you know, they harvest a lot of medicinal like herbs and things like that. And there's a scene where Lassia is like, well, we better carry poison with us. And Kajal's like, what? Because Lassia's like, well, you never know. You may have to kill somebody. And so I kind of bring the reader on this like gradual discovery of like both of them were very much hardened by the world that they were living in. But then there's also the supernatural element of with Lassia being dead, there's a rule in this world where if you bury somebody without burning them, without cremating them, they will turn into a vengeful ghost. And so, you know, the sister that she perceives as innocent and cheerful and good literally becomes a monster to haunt Kajal, who considers herself a monster. So kind of playing with these like you know, what you consider like a grumpy sunshine like stereotype, and then kind of forming it into something completely different. That was like a really big draw of writing the book for me. And in terms of the brothers, you kind of have the same thing where you think one thing at the beginning because you only have one person's point of view, and then you meet the other brother and you're like, oh, well, that's not true at all, is it? So yeah, I really liked kind of playing with those reader expectations when writing the siblings.
Like grumpy and dead, like grumpy and vengeful. It just gets grumpier and grumpier.
The missing dwarves from Snow White.
Yeah. I want to ask now about the Foxbanes, which is the graphic novel, and Death Country, which is told in verse, because I love the conceptually like approaching a story from different angles and different mediums of storytelling. So I'd love to know from both of you if you could talk about like the writing process behind it, and also how it is to create, and sort of obviously it's hard. I ask this question sometimes to people who only write in verse and they're like, I don't know how to write not in verse. But if you could talk us through like the writing process and kind of considerations that you might have to make that like perhaps might be different than the medium that you've chosen. RM, do you want to start?
Sure. So I decided to write Death's Country in verse because of the music aspect of the story. I wanted the story to sound like a song. And I also wanted it to pay homage to these stories about the underworld that are written in poetry, whether that is the poetic Edna of Norse mythology, or Homer's Odyssey, which involves Odysseus going into the underworld to seek information, or of course Dante's Divine Comedy, which is written entirely in verse. I find it very interesting that we went from using verse to tell speculative stories essentially to now most verse novels, not all of them, but most are contemporary realistic fiction nowadays. So I wanted to kind of go back to the origins of verse, and to make it sound like a song, because my main character Andres is a musician. He does not have a lyre in this case because he is from the modern era, so he has an electric guitar, but he plays music, and there is a component of music magic that runs through all of this. And in order to craft it, I had to both look at the overarching story, but also at each individual poem. With a novel in verse, the poems can't quite stand on their own completely out of context, but you do want them to be coherent if you just look at a single section of it, that it makes the most sense in context, but it's more like a snapshot of something. And also, a novel in verse is much shorter word count wise than a prose novel. My prose middle grade novels are 60 to 70,000 words. A verse novel really can't be more than 35 just because of the printing considerations. So trying to condense a story into those words meant that every single word had to count. And I also had to talk about 3 different characters and flesh them out to a fair degree. Andres is, of course, the main character, and then his love interest, Renee and Leora. So they have less time on the page, but I still had to establish their characters with the reader.
So I grew up reading comics, and I was so into it that I automatically, when I think of any new stories, it comes to me in comics form. Like I even dream as me like reading a comic book that's like finished. And I wake up like, oh my god, I should draw that, and then like it disappears, unfortunately. So it's just really natural for me to come up with a story with both visual and words. But when I do make a graphic novel, I always start with writing first, because unless I have a concrete plot, at least set in stone, like if I draw without doing that, there will be time where I have to go fix everything and like redraw everything, and that will be like a huge waste of time and energy. So I do very rough, like skeletal synopsis, like with like not much description. I just basically jot down like what happens, and then all the cool things that novelists do with words, I try to do that with like drawings. So all the embellishment, all the mood, all the and also with color, you can express a lot of the emotion and all that with color. So all of those things I do it visually.
Yeah, I love how, because you showed us those like image boards basically from the beginning. I love how both of you are considering not only inspirations, but like the way that the retelling and the reimaginings sort of affect each other. Like, you know, they influence them to create this kind of rounded piece of work that stands on its own. Um, I want to ask about one of my favorite themes in kindling, which is kind of what you talked about earlier, um, which is about war and loyalty specifically. And also, as you mentioned, the effects of war on us, slash, not really us, but like on the kindlings. So I would love to know if you could talk about these themes and how it manifests for the kindlings.
Yeah. Thank you for this question, because it's so essential to the heart of the book. I was thinking about Seven Samurai, and spoiler: the battle is won, right? And the samurai are victorious, but at this huge cost, right? Their numbers have been greatly decimated from where they were at the beginning of the story. And I'm going to paraphrase here, but one of the things that one of the remaining samurai says to another is, you know, they won, the farmers won, the civilians won, but we lost. We always lose. And that's something that really kind of stuck with me as I was thinking about, like, okay, what would this story be like if it was children? And this kind of came to why I felt that I could write this story now and have it have something new to say, because it is children. I feel like within the past few years, more than that, maybe a decade right now, I feel like the amount of things that we're asking of our young people are becoming so great and so burdensome, right? We are asking them to walk into schools where they aren't necessarily safe. We are asking them uh, to kind of live their lives as if there is a future secured for them, which there might not be, right? Financial stability, right? Economic stability, global stability in terms of war, right? Pandemics, right? We are asking so much of them, and we are also asking them to take up these burdens that we are placing on them that we could not solve, right? I've seen so many young people kind of mobilizing in these really, really incredible ways, right? Marching on Washington, speaking at climate summits, um, uh, buying out tickets to certain rallies, right? So those rallies wouldn't be that well attended, and it's incredible, right? It's really amazing that young people are stepping up in these ways. But should they have to, right? And that's kind of at the heart of kindling. We are asking in kindling, these kindling warriors, these child warriors are asked to fight these wars for a future because they are burning themselves out as they're doing it, that they probably won't ever see, that they might not ever see. So they're fighting for everyone else but themselves, essentially. And it's a little bit different, right? Our young people are fighting, for the future. We could not guarantee them. But yeah, and that came out through war, right? And loyalty to a nation that was not loyal to them, right? They're loyal to this idea of their country, or these institutions that they have believed in, been raised to believe in, but these institutions have failed them, right? And yet they still have fought for those institutions, fought for the hope of stability. And it's fraught. It's a really fraught relationship, I think, in real life, and it's a fraught relationship in kindling the book. And all of these seven characters are seven main characters in the story, and they all kind of deal with that relationship to kind of these institutions that they pledged their lives to, literally, right, in different ways. And some of them react with anger, and some of them react with kind of trying to uphold those old ways, and some of them react with, like, well, I don't know, who can say, here I am, just gonna kind of look out for myself. And some of them are kind of searching for home, searching for stability. And all of it is complicated, right? None of them is kind of any one thing. None of them is just angry, or just like whatever, or just kind of loyal. I hope that reflects kind of the realities of the real world as well, and how, yeah, we want to we were raised to believe in certain dreams or in certain institutions that they would not fail us, but they are failing us. And what do we do about that? Do we abandon that idea entirely? Do we fight for it? What does that fighting look like? I mean, I hope it brings up these questions for readers, even as they're in this like fantasy story about like trying to save a village. And so yeah, I hope it's all in there, and I hope it speaks to young people today.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned before, when you have these 7 different characters that are all processing in a way, you give a lot of people different like resonating points, to start with as you talk about their journey throughout the book. I want to ask now all of you what is one part of your writing process for this book specifically, which you would go back and change if you had a time machine, or if if you don't have any that you would change, if you have any advice that you would go back and tell yourself.
Can I start this one?
Oh yeah, no,
I have an answer for this one, because I walked into this, thinking 7 points of view, no problem. I wrote We Are Not Free, and that has 14 point of view characters. It'll be okay. I walked into this thinking like, oh, the plot's all there for me. It'll be so simple. And I was a fool. I tell you, I had no idea what I was doing, because, right, We Are Not Free, yes, 14 points of view, but it's not, I mean, we see each character once, basically. The Kindling is a true ensemble cast where everyone has their own thing going on at any one time, and kind of who carries the forward thrust of the story is different. Like, it changes. It's one character at the beginning, and then, probably 100 pages in, it shifts to another character who has kind of the most interesting dynamic narrative going on, and then it switches to another one, 30 pages later. And so, yeah, that was difficult. And then also, I don't know if you have seen Magnificent Seven or Seven Samurai, but the whole middle of that book is characters wandering around a village having character development and talking to each other. And I don't know what to do with that. I'm a plot writer, right? I love writing battle scenes and action, and I love things happening. And I got to the middle of the first draft of Kindling, and like, there was just like this empty swath of the middle of the novel ahead. And I knew that they had to grow somehow, but I didn't know how to make that happen. Well, yeah. Oops. I really struggled. I thought it would be a cakewalk. It was not. It was a real struggle, because I feel like, well, I mean, I should have known. Every novel teaches you how to write that novel, right? Every novel is different. And so I was a fool. And I hope I'm better now, but I probably won't be. I'll probably walk into the next one thinking it'll be fun and easy, and it'll be just as challenging.
Mine also has to do with point of view. If I could go back, I originally, the first draft of Call Forth a Fox, I wrote in third person, kind of like as an homage to like the fairy tale. But it took me a while and a lot of like agent feedback, because this is the novel that got me my agent, to find out that the third person point of view was just not serving the story. It wasn't serving the story. It wasn't serving the main character. And so I did a huge revision where I changed it from third person to first person. And that's a lot more than like find, replace she with I. Like, there's a lot more that goes into it. It's basically like rewriting the entire novel. And so that took a lot of time. And so if I had a time machine, I would have told myself, like, just write it in first person to begin with. But yeah, again, like, books teach you how to write them. And so it just took me a few drafts to realize how this book should really be written.
Yeah, if I could just hop in real quickly with like a process thing. Now, before I get through a novel, I spend a long time writing just kind of the first few pages and then the first chapter over and over and over again, trying to hone in on the point of view and the voice and the tone to make sure that, like, yes, this will sustain the rest of the project. And so I did the same thing for Kindling, where I was like, I tried writing it kind of in first, in third, in first plural with the we, and then like I kept straying away from this you. It's written, the whole thing is written in second person. But it took me so many drafts to kind of settle on the right POV. So yeah, it's a hugely important thing. And it dictates the way the story is told.
For me, this is my first fictional graphic novel that I've ever made. So, I mean, it was really nerve-wracking for me to write it. My first two books are nonfiction. Like my second book is a memoir. My first book was a cookbook graphic novel. So, it's a completely different project. And I have a background in illustration. So, I was trained to draw anything I imagined, but like to write something that I imagined was such a new and scary thing to do. Um, and also, like, this is the longest book I've ever made. It's like over 300 pages. So when I was writing the plot, when it got to like the last couple of chapters, like I knew already this book is gonna be like massive book for me to draw. So I kind of like wanted to like wrap it up in a way that's like it's concise, so it doesn't like go over like 400 pages, and it's gonna take me like 10 years to draw it. So if I could, and if my publisher would have allowed it, like maybe I could have made it into two books. So it's like like less than like 250 page count for each book, and I can kind of elongate certain sections so it feels more like cohesive and like full fleshed.
I would change nothing. My book is perfect. No, I actually struggle to have an answer to this one because I feel like all of my struggles in writing the book were like some pretty typical struggles. Like the big difference in writing this book as opposed to like my other books for me was just like the amount of research that I had to do on not only but like Ayurveda, which is like an ancient Indian medical practice and stuff like that, and making sure that I was getting terms correct and like which language am I using for this specific word, because I change between like Hindi and Punjabi and Urdu and stuff like that. And so it was very challenging in that regard, and like figuring out like the pacing, because the pacing is kind of like a little different in this book as opposed to like some other YA fantasies. But like I can't think of like something specifically where I would go back in time and be like, hey, do this different. It's just I would go back in time and be like, keep going, I guess. You'll get there eventually.
The book gets written, don't worry about it past self.
Yeah, exactly.
That's helpful too.
Yeah. I wish we had time machines like that. I think for me, like I have a tendency to lean kind of into an oral storytelling voice, and I feel like that actually works better with middle grade, where you can sort of have characters directly addressing the reader and breaking the fourth wall a little bit. And the first part of Death Country was originally a bit more like that, where it felt like it was Andres telling the reader the story. But in YA, that tends to come off as too passive, like, okay, you're telling, you're not showing. It doesn't quite work as well. So I would advise my past self to remember that this is very interesting to you, but a lot of readers won't quite find it as engaging. And it's not like you're going to be sitting there reading aloud to every single person who picks up this book.
I love that you brought that up. I was on a where was I when I was talking? Anyway, I was talking and I was saying somewhere that like I find that I appreciate listening to middle grade novels on audiobook versus reading them. And I think what you were just saying like totally makes that click, like why that unlocks a different mood in my brain to like understand that. The last question that I have for you all is, what are you most looking forward to for fall? So, Tara, what are you most looking forward to for fall?
I mean, the most obvious answer is spooky season, right? Like, come on, I live for spooky season. It's always Halloween in my heart. But my very specific answer is that Trader Joe's gets this seasonal item every fall now. And Robin, you may have to correct my pronunciation, but they're like the Korean hotoks.
Yeah, I love like, yes.
They're cinnamon hot dogs, and they're so good. Like they just brought them back, and I grabbed like 3 bags of them and threw them in my cart because I'm so excited. And I'm going to have one after this panel, and I'm very excited about it.
For
I have
me,
one.
oh,
Oh
sorry.
no, go ahead, Robin. You do it. You do it. Mine's a cheat, so you go.
Um, I am looking forward to and also very anxious about the election. So that will be great to get it over with and just like put us out of this misery. Um, and also, I'm going on a residency to Handage, which is in Georgia, and I've never been there before, and I've heard really good things about it. So I'm really looking forward to that. Tracy?
Okay, I'm gonna do mine. Mine is I am not a spooky season person. I'm not a fall and winter person. I'm a spring and summer person. And so the thing I'm looking forward to is planting season. My daffodil bulbs are coming in. Not daffodil, yeah, daffodil tulip bulbs. I can put some peonies in the ground. So I'm excited for planting now to enjoy the bounty of flowers later. And actually for Tara's launch gift for We Shall Be Monsters, I got her goth tulips. They're like the darkest, blackest tulips that you'd possibly get. And so I'm going to plant her some goth tulips now and then give them to her, a year after her book is launched.
I'm very excited for these.
I think for me, I do enjoy summer. I think there's like a lot of things to love about it, but it also, I don't know, I feel kind of hazy during summer. Like I don't have a lot of focus or motivation. I kind of fall out of like good routines. And so what I like about fall and winter, I feel like it just like sharpens my mind and gets me back into the spirit of like keeping good routines, especially around writing and reading. And so that's what I'm looking forward to the most, is kind of leaving the haze of summer behind and like kind of waking up.
I'm looking forward to getting to experience Boston in fall for a weekend because, alas, in Miami, we don't have seasons. We have humid and slightly less humid. So it'll be nice to walk around a city where I can actually like crunch through the leaves for a little while instead of, oh, a palm leaf died. I guess that's our equivalent of autumn leaves.
That's how I used to feel living in Southern California. I'm in the Chicago suburbs now, but in Southern California, it was like blink and you miss it fall. Like I was like, does it even happen?
Exactly. It doesn't really count.
Yeah, something that Markel was saying really resonated with me. We had like in the summer we had a heat streak or whatever you call it, and there was one night where it broke. Like when the rain comes and everything kind of the heat breaks for a second, and it was like night and day. I was sitting somewhere and all of a sudden I was like, wait, I can like remember things again. Like I felt it kind of just immediately wash over me, and it was the strangest thing. It's never happened to me before, but it was so weird how I immediately was like, wait, the last couple of weeks, this is why I was so unproductive. Like this is why, because my brain just like was so hot, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, as soon as it becomes June, I just get so much less productive.
The brain overheats in its brain cage.
Yes.
Everyone just becomes a puddle person.
Thank you, everyone, so much. Thank you for everyone watching. Thank you, everyone, to all the panelists and authors who have joined me. Everyone's book links are in the description box below. So you can go pick up all of these books today if you want, and specifically for the upcoming fall season. And I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day. And thank you all for watching.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.